I never imagined that penny pinching on our home furnishings could become a red flag for a much darker secret buried beneath our daily routines. When Emily insisted we pick up that battered brown couch from a stranger in the suburbs instead of ordering a brand new one, I congratulated myself on saving hundreds of dollars. We moved the threadbare sofa into our cramped living room, taped at the seams, and I felt pride in my ingenuity while she smiled, her eyes distant. We joked about skipping fancy groceries and cooking beans instead of buying steak, and she agreed, even adding that she wanted to reinvest the money into our future. The distance between us felt ordinary at first. Long work hours, early mornings, stifled conversations about bills and weekend plans, but nothing more alarming than routine fatigue. I convinced myself that her silence after I asked about a new credit card charge was just stress, and I dismissed the nagging tickle in my chest. Last month, I noticed our utility bills creeping upward, despite turning off lights and scrubbing our water usage to the bone, and I chalked it up to faulty meters. She waved it off with a tight smile, promising to call the electric company while I buried my curiosity beneath spreadsheets of household expenses. When the landlord called about an overdue water bill, citing a mismatch in our account numbers, that prickling sensation returned and wouldn't let me rest. Everything felt off-kilter, our supposed thriftiness contradicted by those rising bills, and Emily's rehearsed explanations almost as worn as the couch fabric. She took calls in the bedroom with the door firmly closed, her voice hushed, and I pretended not to notice how fast my pulse raced as I passed by. It didn't make sense that someone who championed hunched shoulders over new furniture and thrift store finds would suddenly rack up charges I couldn't trace. Still, love is a clever hypnotist, dulling senses with sighs and hugs until doubt is shoved aside as an inconvenient intruder. I told myself that her loyalty was ironclad, that years of memories outweighed a few unanswered texts and cryptic bank alerts. In the background, I imagined our future. Confident we'd save for a house, children, a lifetime together, unaware that every frugal victory hid a lie. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with our laptop glowing blue in the dim light, opening the utility portal again despite the knot tightening in my stomach. I toggled between gas, electric, and water invoices, scanning line by line until I saw a foreign account ID that didn't match our name or address. Bewildered, I called each department support line, sweat prickling on my forehead as I read off our meter numbers, only to be told they were linked to a different property. Frustration boiled over when Emily breezed into the kitchen, coffee in hand like nothing was wrong, and casually asked why I was glued to the screen past midnight. I hesitated, voice wavering, and then blurted out about the mismatched account that kept landing us penalties and fees, fully expecting her to sympathize. Instead, her smile faltered, her eyes flickered to the table, and she excused herself with a soft sigh, muttering about an urgent work event. I wanted to believe her, so I closed the computer and poured a second cup of coffee, faking a calm I didn't feel while she lingered at the counter. Over the next week, I combed through bank statements, circling every unexplained charge, downloaded PDFs, and bookmarked suspicious entries with names I didn't recognize. One line read, "HOSTESS REVIVE," with a balance that didn't seem small. That $100 hit my credit card at 3 a.m. and had no description beyond that cryptic title. When I showed it to her, in the daylight this time, she paused before saying it was a team-building retreat that she'd paid for on behalf of her department. The tightness in my chest returned, but I nodded and agreed that she'd sort it out, even though nothing about her story felt right. Late shifts at the office became her new routine, and her phone calls moved to the bathroom with the door closed, her laughter echoing faintly beyond the lock. I felt like an amateur detective, sketching timelines on sticky notes, mapping out her comings and goings, while pretending at dinner that everything was fine. There were whispered arguments when I asked about her whereabouts, and she would shift the blame onto my own paranoia, telling me I needed to trust her more. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that each tiny lie was a thread unraveling the tapestry of our life together. And I was desperate to find the scissors. I could no longer ignore the late-night bank alerts that pinged my phone with credit card declines and payment confirmations from vendors I'd never heard of before. When I hovered over Emily's purse to slip the card out while she was in the shower, my hand trembled, and I nearly dropped it. Guilt and determination warring in my chest. I pulled up the card's online statement, scrolling past Uber Eats and Amazon purchases, until something black on white stopped me cold. VIP nightclub entrance fee, $5,000, with her name beside it. My heart pounded so hard I could taste it, and I clicked the PDF icon to download a glossy digital receipt stamped with secrecy clauses I couldn't shift from my mind. VIP nightclub X, attendance fee, $5,000 per person. Client, Emily Turner. Event, private. It glared at me like proof of some wild double life she'd been living. I sat frozen, the tiles on the countertop suddenly sharp and cold against my bare elbows as the reality settled in like ice water. Memories of her brushing off my calls, mysterious lipstick marks on her collar, and whispered phone calls in parked cars flooded my mind in a single brutal flash. I tried to close the document, but something compelled me to scroll through the fine print, which mentioned champagne tables, isolating booths, and an ambassador program she'd been invited to. Ambassador? What kind of title did that give her in a den of painted smiles and half-naked strangers, and why had she never mentioned it? I thought of all the nights I'd brought home takeout, hoping for laughter and shared stories, only to find her vacant eyes and an unease I'd blamed on my own illusions. My hands shook as I slid the receipt across the table, and when she emerged in a towel, involuntary confusion flickered across her features. "What is that?" I asked, voice flat. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw panic before she snatched the paper away, with a practiced grace. She inhaled deeply and said it was an exclusive launch party she'd attended as a work perk, that $5,000 covered a night of VIP access, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But half of me felt like a fool for believing that excuse, and the other half a stranger watching a final curtain fall on the trust we'd built. That receipt was a grenade pin in my gut, and I realized there was no ignoring the blast radius. It was time to find out who she really was. Over the next days, I became obsessed with piecing together her clandestine itinerary, mapping out every charge on her card and cross-referencing locations until my screen was littered with pinned map markers. I discovered reservations at seaside villas, secret dinners with exorbitant corkage fees, and payments to stylists who sent lipstick shades I could only imagine traced on someone else. One alert showed an overnight limo service dropping off 2 guests at a secluded estate, followed by ambassador check-in bonus, $1,500, alongside her signature in the notes. I followed her bank account like a bloodhound, and every time I got close to an answer, she rerouted funds to obscure company names, leaving me chasing ghosts through shell corporations. I set up a burner phone to call the listings for luxury suites, feigning a reporter's curiosity, and learned that ambassadors were handed wristbands granting backstage access and private stages away from prying eyes. I tapped into Yelp reviews where a Velvet Rope Mystery Club was lauded as strict invitation only, and rumored to host celebrities unchained from tabloid cameras. Each glowing review referenced a host with a magnetic smile introduced as our ambassador, and I connected that role directly to my wife's name on the receipts. The more I learned, the more I hated the person reflected in those hidden documents, a woman who signed contracts behind my back and sold my trust for VIP treatment. My nights blurred into one long stakeout. I'd pace the street outside private mansions, watching for a sleek black SUV to deposit her in sequins and stilettos. One evening, I saw her, framed by tinted windows, looking radiant but distant, like someone else entirely, and I felt my heart break in slow motion. When I confronted her parked outside a different club, headlights off, engine idling, she pretended not to recognize me, greeting the driver with a nod of staged indifference. I opened the car door, demanded answers, and she told me to calm down, that this was just her work, branding and networking at elite gatherings I had no right to enter. The air between us crackled with accusation as I quoted prices and names, and she deflected, saying our finances were separate and she didn't owe me explanations. Her words cut deeper than any confession could, because they laid bare her willingness to hide a life where our partnership meant nothing more than shared utility payments. In that moment, I realized this didn't end with a single private party. It was a high-stakes game where I'd been blindly anteing up. Determined to unmask the full scope of her deception, I created a fake corporate persona to infiltrate online forums where exclusive event tickets were being resold at astronomical markups. I DM'd a broker who specialized in VIP hookups using a voice disguiser app and discovered that Ambassador Emily Turner had negotiated a multi-year contract to entice high rollers with private afterparties. The broker boasted about arranging secret auctions of art pieces and closed-door performances where Emily would be the icebreaker, a prize designed to lure the wealthy into spending thousands. It wasn't just one receipt anymore. It was a ledger of debauchery that traced her as the focal point of glitzy weekends hidden behind soundproof walls. I confronted her again at home, walking through the door while she sorted post at the kitchen island, and tossed a printed PDF onto the granite surface. She sighed, ran a hand through her hair, and admitted that she'd been offered an ambassador stipend to attend brand experiences, but insisted it was all above board and completely legitimate. I shook as I asked why she never told me such deals existed, why she kept it secret when we were struggling to afford basic repairs. "I didn't want you to worry," she said, voice low, but her eyes glinted with shame or triumph. I couldn't tell which. She swore she didn't cross any lines, that I was misreading dinners as trysts and bottle service as betrayal, but I had receipts that named her, stamped with dates and times. The woman I loved became untouchable behind layers of corporate NDAs and hush agreements, and I felt powerless as I read clause after clause mandating silence. I barged into her email account at midnight, scrolling through message threads titled Confidential Ambassador Program, feeling the weight of her duplicity with every unread notification. There were images of her smiling under spotlights, greeting investors who thought they were meeting a rising beauty influencer instead of someone with a ring on my finger. I heard my own voice quiver as I confronted her at work, standing outside her office in a sea of tailored suits and exotic fragrances, and I asked for truth, not spin. She faced me with a calm that made my limbs go numb, spat out that I was ruining her career, her word, her life, and stormed past me without looking back. Alone in that lobby, I realized I was holding on to the shards of a marriage that had been hollowed out by VIP passes and empty promises. In the cold light of dawn, I flipped through our family album and found pictures of simpler days. A thrift shop date, our first apartment couch, a picnic by the lake, none of which cost anywhere near $5,000. The glossy parties and luxury retreats were someone else's highlight reel, carefully curated and paid for by her behind my back. I packed a bag with a few essentials and a stack of printouts, receipts, NDAs, and a photo of the two of us smiling when trust still mattered. I placed the documents on the coffee table, her wedding ring on top, and left before she woke, the morning sun catching the tears I had no right to shed. I walked to the nearest bus stop with a quiet resolve, knowing that reclaiming my life meant stepping away from the glamour that had betrayed me. Each step felt heavy, yet liberating, as if I'd shed someone else's skin and could finally breathe my own air again. I texted her from a burner phone, 3 words that summed up every betrayal. "We're done, Emily." I changed our bank passwords, froze the cards, and set up new billing accounts under my name alone, determined to rebuild honesty from the ground up. The echo of thumping bass and champagne toasts faded behind me as I boarded the bus, leaving the VIP world and her ambassador status locked away. I didn't know what tomorrow held, and part of me trembled at the void of uncertainty, but another part felt alive, unburdened by secrets. Over the next weeks, I found solace in flea markets, picking up mismatched chairs and quirky lamps, reminding myself that life was more than curated exclusivity. I threw out the last necklace she left behind, a glittering trophy from one of those parties, and finally felt free from her gilded cage. Sometimes I catch myself scrolling through my old credit card statements, but I let the thumbnails of receipts burn themselves into memory. My phone no longer buzzes at odd hours with messages from brokers or event coordinators. Silence is the most honest sound I've known in years. In the end, I realized that loyalty isn't measured by velvet ropes or champagne flutes, but by the simple act of walking away from the lies. Months later, I find myself unpacking boxes in a one-bedroom loft that I managed to snag after scrimping every cent I had left. The skyline of downtown feels different now. No longer a backdrop for her clandestine escapades, but a reminder of how far I've come. The second-hand mid-century dresser I bartered for at a market creaks when I open the drawers, but it's mine through every negotiation, every handshake, every morning I chose honesty over easy lies. I remember how at first, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting a limousine to pull up with her apology or a final plea. None ever came. Instead, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee each day I brewed myself. The simplest ritual anchoring me to a life I could finally control. Work has slowed me down in a welcome way. I've taken a transfer to a smaller branch where my boss trusts me with numbers instead of shifting me from cubicle to cubicle. My cubicle now has a sliding glass window overlooking the river, and on slow afternoons I doodle in a notebook about the future. A house with windows I can open wide. A porch swing swung by honest hands. My colleagues don't know about Emily's ambassador program or the $5,000 receipts hidden in her purse. They know about my late-night audits and my reputation for catching billing errors that save the company thousands. I think sometimes she'd be proud of me if she ever realized the gravity of what she did, but grief no longer has the power to pull me under. It just comes in waves. Brief, honest reminders that I once loved someone who traded our vows for velvet ropes. One crisp Saturday morning, I walk through a farmer's market clutching a canvas tote, eyeing heirloom tomatoes and handmade soaps. I pass a vendor selling reclaimed wood furniture, and I run my hand over a coffee table that looks as if it was once part of someone's childhood home. I can see my reflection in its polished surface, smudged hair, sleeves rolled up, a small tattoo of a compass on my wrist reminding me I'm finally heading north. I imagine inviting someone new over, someone who won't flinch at the couch's squeak or my thrift store lampshade, someone who values stories over status. The idea still feels foreign, but hopeful. I haven't blocked her number. Occasionally, curiosity pricks me. I wonder if she survived the fallout of her own making. I text her once, months ago, a single line, "I hope you find what you were searching for." She never replied. I don't press the matter. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. Instead, I catalog my own questions now. Will I ever trust again? Will I ever feel safe letting someone else sit beside me while bills pile up? My answers are tentative. Maybe, someday. Last week, I overheard two women at a coffee shop whisper about some influencer scandal, an ambassador who'd ghosted her husband for plastic VIP passes and secret nightclubs. They didn't use names, but I felt a surge of vindication when they concluded that trust should never be a commodity. I didn't correct them when one of them assumed it was some celebrity. I just smiled to myself and sipped my latte. This time, the secret was mine to keep, a quiet trophy of survival. At dusk, I climbed the fire escape onto the roof and watched the city lights flicker on, one by one. There's no champagne cork popping here, no velvet ropes, just the distant hum of traffic and the soft glow of office floors still lit. I breathe in the cool air, letting it fill my lungs like forgiveness. The past isn't erased, it's etched into the receipts I tore up, the contracts I shredded, the ring I returned. But it no longer dictates the story I'm living. I lean against the railing, compass tattoo catching the final light of the sun, and whisper, "This is freedom." And for the first time since finding that black receipt, it feels real. A few Sundays after that rooftop moment, I found myself sitting on a hard wooden pew in a small Methodist church, the late morning light filtering through stained glass and casting colored patterns on the hymnals. I'd almost scoffed at the idea of organized religion. My faith had felt as fractured as my marriage. But when the choir began to sing Amazing Grace, something in me unclenched. I closed my eyes and let the harmonies wash over my tangled thoughts, imagining each note lifting pieces of that black VIP receipt off my shoulders. The pastor spoke about forgiveness, not condoning wrongdoing, but freeing yourself from bitterness, and I nodded along, surprised at how much hope that single sermon could stir. After the service, I lingered in the foyer while congregants exchanged handshakes and "Peace be with you." An older woman named Ruth, with silver hair pinned back and a gentle smile creasing her eyes, offered me coffee and introduced me to a small recovery group that met on Wednesday evenings. I wasn't sure what to call it, heartbreak support group, anti-VIP cult, but I signed up, telling myself it was just an experiment in vulnerability. When I walked into a circle of folding chairs that first week, each person clutching a paper cup and a stack of religious pamphlets titled Rebuilding After Betrayal, I felt the protective walls around my heart tremble. They shared stories of spouses who'd hidden debts, secret bank accounts, and midnight rendezvous. I realized mine was far from unique. Week by week, my confession unfolded. The couch scavenged at a thrift store, the spree of falsified utility bills, the $5,000 marquee of deceit. I laid out each detail, trembling as I passed around printouts that once felt like evidence for a courtroom, but now served as artifacts of past suffering. I was surprised when the group clapped softly afterward, not out of schadenfreude, but solidarity. Someone handed me a bracelet engraved with "Faith over Fear," and I snapped it on my wrist without hesitation. Outside the church basement, I bumped into Grace, a yoga instructor who'd started coming after her fiancé ran off with a coworker. She laughed at my "Faith over Fear" bracelet, admitting she'd once paid for a private yoga retreat, only to learn her ex had swapped her name for some influencers at the registration desk. She and I traded smartphone screenshots of suspicious charges. A luxury retreat wellness fee for $2,500 in one case, an elite yoga ambassador payout in the other. Together, we poked holes in the euphemisms that once sounded innocuous. Ambassador became a code word for betrayal. Midweek, I found myself back on that rooftop, but this time I wasn't looking out over the city and longing. I was sending my prayer up into the dusk sky. I no longer felt hollow. I felt centered. The next morning, I met a carpenter named Jose at the flea market who sold me a reclaimed bookshelf, perfect for my living room wall. He told me stories of fixing up old homes and making them whole again, and I recognized the metaphor. I invited him over to assemble it, and when he arrived, toolbox in hand, I realized I was ready to show my space and my life to someone new. That evening, I found myself lighting a candle in the kitchen, the faint scent of vanilla filling the air, and setting 2 mugs of chamomile tea on the coffee table where those receipts once lay. I didn't know if I would ever fully trust another person or whether I could avoid scars entirely, but at least now I could choose whom to invite inside. I pressed my hand against the smoothing wood of Jose's newly built bookshelf and whispered, "Welcome home." Not just to him, but to the new version of myself. And for the first time in months, I couldn't wait to see how the next page of this story would begin. I never expected that inviting someone new into my space would bring the same nervous flutter I felt the night I first discovered Emily's secret receipts. When Jose arrived to assemble the bookshelf, toolbox in hand, I realized I was both terrified and eager to show him every corner of my tiny loft. I led him in through the front door, past the chipped coffee table and thrift store couch that creaked like it had a voice of its own. He smiled at the mismatched decor, shrugged, and said, "Every piece tells a story," like he knew my past as well as I did. As he worked, I made chamomile tea in our chipped mugs and watched him tighten screws and level each shelf, his hands steady, confident. For the first time in months, I felt safe watching someone else enter my home. Over the following days, Jose and I settled into a comfortable routine. We met for breakfast burritos at the corner diner, laughing over half-drunk cups of coffee, and he listened without judgment when I recalled the shock of that $5,000 VIP receipt and the bruising betrayals that followed. He never asked for details beyond what I chose to share. He let me set the pace. He took me on walks past our quirky neighborhood gardens, where volunteers planted wildflowers in abandoned lots, and I realized I was planting seeds of my own healing, watching shy green shoots break through cracked concrete. At church on Sundays, I saw him greet Ruth in the foyer with a respectful nod, and I felt proud to stand beside him, to be seen as someone worthy of compassion and kindness again. One Wednesday evening, Grace coaxed me into standing in front of our recovery circle and reading a poem I'd written about trust and shattered glass. My voice trembled at first, but by the final line, "I gather shards, and in my palm I press forgiveness," I felt a weight lift. The group applauded me, not for the words themselves, but for the courage to speak them. Afterwards, Jose slipped his hand into mine as we walked past the stained glass windows, and I realized that partnership could be simple, grounded in everyday acts, a shared cup of tea, an honest confession, a hand held in the dark. At home, the bookshelf stood proudly against the living room wall, lined with books about carpentry, theology, and travel guides for places I'd never dared to dream of visiting. I placed a single framed photo on its middle shelf, me in that church pew, eyes closed in prayer, and beside it, a small compass ornament, a nod to the tattoo on my wrist. When I turned around, Jose was watching me, his eyes soft. He asked if I trusted him, and I realized I did. I smiled, nodded, and let him pull me into a quiet embrace. A few weeks later, on a Saturday dawn painted in pastel pinks, I walked to the riverbank where Emily and I once picnicked. I carried with me a small box, the last of her things, including the crushed VIP club receipt I'd kept as evidence of my own strength. I let the wind carry it into the water, watching those black letters dissolve into ripples. I whispered a farewell, not just to her, but to every lie she'd ever told. As the paper sank, I felt lighter, freer than ever before. That evening, at the Methodist Church's spring potluck, I sat at a long table with Ruth, Grace, and Jose, passing around dishes of lemon bars and coleslaw. The choir's distant hymns floated through open windows, a gentle reminder that redemption isn't a one-time declaration, but a daily choice. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey. Right past betrayal and into a place where honesty, faith, and love intertwine. And as I looked across the table at Jose's easy smile, I knew I was home. That Saturday morning, I woke before dawn to the soft hum of the city stirring awake. I brewed strong coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the light through the window catching the edges of the compass pendant around my neck. In a few hours, I'd be standing at the community center's open mic night to read the final chapter of my story, the one that began with a black VIP receipt and ended here, with honest hands and a hopeful heart. When I arrived, the room buzzed with locals sharing poetry, folk songs, and stand-up bits. Jose was in the front row, offering a reassuring nod, and I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. My turn came, and I stepped to the mic, the paper in my hand containing words I'd written just that morning, about bartering for a couch that creaked with truth, about chasing shadows in midnight spreadsheets, about tearing up receipts and rebuilding from the wreckage of lies. I read slowly, letting each sentence land, watching faces soften as they recognized the universal sting of betrayal and the harder-won miracle of forgiveness. Afterwards, people came up to me, offering thanks and sharing their own stories of heartbreak and recovery. Grace hugged me, her eyes bright, and Ruth placed her hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You've come so far." And Josie? He took my hand, raised it in a quiet salute, and told me how proud he was of the courage it took to stand there and speak my truth. Walking home in the golden afternoon, I realized that our lives are not defined by the extravagant temptations that threaten to swallow me, but by the simple choices we make every day, to speak honestly, to give generously, to trust again. Back in my loft, I unearthed the compass tattoo on my wrist, tracing its lines with my fingertip. The bookshelf stood behind me, each spine of a well-worn book a testament to stories lived and lessons learned. That evening, I set 2 chairs on the little balcony overlooking the city lights. I poured chamomile tea into chipped mugs and held Jose's hand as we watched the skyline pulse with life. No velvet ropes, no secret whispers, just 2 people, choosing to be present, choosing to love without pretense. And for the first time since the world of VIP receipts and hush-hush contracts faded away, I truly believed in the beauty of a love built on transparency.